When I was around 14 or 15, skateboarding was my whole world. It was my escape, my passion, and the only thing that made me feel truly free. On weekends, my friends and I would skate until the sun disappeared behind the horizon. Those rides through the city, wind in my face, wheels grinding on pavement, friends laughing around me. Those are still some of my best memories. One particular weekend night stands out more than any other. It began like so many others. Me and a group of friends downtown, taking turns trying new tricks, hyping each other up, pushing each other to get better. As the night went on, people started peeling off one by one to head home. Eventually it was just me, and I decided it was time to call it a night too. It was late, maybe around 10 or 11. After saying goodbye, I hopped on the bus that would drop me a short walk from home. None of my friends lived along that route, so I rode alone, staring out at the smear of city lights as we sped through the streets. The city was still alive, but the late hour made everything feel strangely hollow and distant, like the quiet before a storm. I got off at my stop on a major east-west road. My house was only a 2-minute walk away on a smaller north-south street. As the bus pulled away behind me, the noise of the city seemed to fade with it. I started toward home, the steady sound of my footsteps the only thing breaking the silence. The air was cool, and a light breeze stirred the leaves in the trees lining the street. As I neared the intersection that led from the main road to my street, something caught my eye. A man on a bike appeared, coming from a side street that curved past the elementary school near my house and down toward a creek path I knew well. He seemed to form out of the shadows, like the night had just decided to drop him there. I knew that path. Kids cut through there during the day, but seeing someone emerge from it at that hour put me on edge. Instantly, my gut told me something was off. People walked around at night all the time, but there was something about him, about the way he appeared and where he'd come from, that made my stomach knot. He did not belong there. Not at that time, not on that street. I sped up trying to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him pedaling faster. Then he shouted, "Hey!" His voice echoed down the quiet street, and a jolt of fear shot through me. This wasn't just some random passerby. Something was wrong, and I knew it. My heart pounded as adrenaline kicked in. I was close to home, but I suddenly didn't want to go straight there. My house was the one place I felt safe, and I didn't want this stranger knowing where I lived. I kept moving, trying to act calm while my brain raced, searching for an out. He closed the distance quickly. Within moments, he rolled up beside me and stopped his bike in front of the school, angling it so he was blocking my path. My breath caught as I really saw him for the first time. He was big, easily twice my size, broad and solid. I was a skinny kid, small for my age. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s. That alone made the whole thing feel even more wrong. What grown man follows a teenage boy down a dark street at night? "Where you headed?" he asked. His words were slightly slurred, and there was something strange in his eyes. Drunk, high, or just off, I couldn't tell, but every instinct I had screamed danger. I hid my fear the only way I knew how, with attitude. I snapped back something along the lines of, "Doesn't matter," hoping that if I sounded annoyed and confident, he'd back off. He didn't. Instead, he leaned closer and asked, almost casually, if I wanted to go behind the school and hang out with him. My heart nearly stopped. The picture that flashed through my mind, alone behind a dark, empty school with this stranger, terrified me. I gripped my skateboard tighter and for a second thought about swinging it at his head. But what if I missed? What if it only made him angrier? He was bigger, stronger. If I started something I couldn't finish, I might make everything worse. In a panic, I pulled out my phone and tried calling 911. The line was busy. For a second I thought I'd misheard, but it was real. Busy. A wall slamming down in front of my one solid plan. My panic spiked. I could feel the board biting into my fingers, my knuckles turning white. Could I outrun a guy on a bike? Would anyone hear if I screamed? The houses around us were dark. No porch lights. No silhouettes in windows. It felt like the whole neighborhood had emptied out, leaving just me and him on that stretch of asphalt. I thought about sprinting up to random doors and pounding on them, but I didn't even know who'd answer, or if anyone would. Then, as I scanned the street behind me, I saw her. An older woman walked along the opposite sidewalk, about 70 feet away. She looked to be in her late 60s or early 70s. At that moment, she might as well have been glowing. She was a lifeline. I bolted toward her, yelling for help. I didn't care that the man on the bike followed. I just ran. When I reached her, I begged her for help, my voice shaking. But she recoiled, clearly frightened by this sudden commotion and the presence of two strangers in the middle of the night. She told me to leave her alone. Desperation made me pay attention. I noticed an accent in her voice. On a hunch, I blurted out, "Do you speak Polish?" Polish was my family's language, one I'd grown up hearing and speaking at home. "Yes," she answered, surprised. The word hit me like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. I quickly explained everything in Polish, about the man, the questions, the school, the busy 911 line. My words tumbled over each other in a rush. The moment she understood, she changed. Her posture softened, and her eyes filled with concern instead of suspicion. For the first time that night, I felt a tiny thread of hope. She told me to call 911 again. I told her it had been busy. She insisted I try once more. As I reached for my phone, I saw the man on the bike start to retreat. He muttered something about not wanting any trouble, then turned his bike around and rode back toward the school, disappearing into the darkness he'd first come from. My heart was still pounding, but the immediate danger had passed. This time, when I dialed 911, the call went through. I reported what had happened and gave a description. They said they'd send officers to look around. Later, they called back and told me they hadn't found anyone matching the man I'd described. It was like he had vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared. That night remains the scariest experience of my life. I still don't know what might have happened if that woman hadn't been walking down that street at that exact moment. I'm incredibly grateful she was there, and that she spoke Polish. After that, my entire view of personal safety changed. Before then, I never really understood how vulnerable I could be, even in places I thought I knew. That man, that empty street, and the sound of a busy emergency line still haunt me. Delivering pizzas is usually simple, mindless work. Drive, drop off, repeat. And out of all my customers, Mr. Pellin was easily the most predictable. Every Thursday night, without fail, he ordered the exact same thing, a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. He lived alone in an old, crumbling house at the edge of town, surrounded by dense trees that made the place feel shut off from the world. I almost never saw him. Instead of opening his front door, he used a strange little rope and sled setup. A wooden tray hung from a pulley on his porch, stretched out to the driveway. I would place the pizza on the tray, then he'd pull it up from inside, collect the pizza, and lower the sled back down again. Weird, but it was his routine and I'd gotten used to it. One Thursday, things were different from the start. The order didn't come through the app. Instead, the phone at the shop rang, and it was Mr. Pellin himself. That alone was unusual. He asked for 2 pizzas this time instead of 1, and reminded me to still use the sled system. But there was something in his voice that made me uneasy. I couldn't pin it down, maybe strained, maybe nervous. But it didn't sound like the calm, distant tone I was used to. I brushed it off, assuming he had company over and needed more food. I drove the familiar winding road through the woods, headlights bouncing off trees and gravel. When his house finally came into view, the porch light was on like always, a weak glow in the darkness. But the sled wasn't there. It was never missing. Usually it was already hanging halfway down, waiting. I stepped out of my car, pizzas in hand, and stared up at the porch. The house was completely still. No movement, no sound. I approached slowly, half expecting the sled to suddenly drop down. It didn't. The house just loomed back at me, the windows dark, the porch light throwing sickly yellow over peeling paint. That's when I saw it, movement near the basement window. A shape hunched low to the ground, just a smear of motion in the corner of my eye. I turned and saw a masked figure crouched by the window. The instant they noticed me, they jerked away and disappeared beneath the sill. Ice shot through my veins. I hurried along the side of the house, careful but unable to keep from looking. The basement window was cracked open. Through the narrow gap I could make out more shadows inside, multiple masked figures moving around in the dimness. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and called the police. I stammered my way through what I'd seen. People in masks in the basement, possibly breaking in, possibly worse. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way. Those next few minutes stretched on forever. I backed away, still clutching the pizzas like they might shield me from something. I didn't want to leave, knowing that Mr. Pellin could be inside that house with those people, but barging in would have been suicide. I just stood there, staring at the basement window, feeling my heart slam against my ribs. Then I saw them. The masked figures were dragging something heavy across the basement floor. It took a second to realize it was a person. Then I recognized the gray hair and frail frame. It was Mr. Pellin. He was tied up, ropes around his wrists and ankles, struggling weakly as they pulled him along like cargo. One of them started punching him, hard, over and over. Each blow made me flinch. Watching a defenseless old man being beaten in his own home, right in front of me, made my skin crawl. I'd never felt so utterly helpless. All I could do was wait for the sirens. Eventually, the quiet road outside exploded in red and blue. Police cars pulled up fast, officers pouring out and surrounding the house. I stayed well back, my pulse racing as they moved in and stormed the place. Shouts, boots slamming against floors, commands barked into the dark. The masked figures tried to run, but they never made it far. One by one, officers dragged them out in handcuffs, 3 of them all dressed in black, their faces hidden behind blank, emotionless masks. Then they brought out Mr. Pellin. He was alive, but barely. His face was bruised and swollen, his body limp. Deep red grooves marked where the ropes had bitten into his wrists and ankles. He could hardly stand, even with officers supporting him. But when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of recognition and something like gratitude. Paramedics rushed him into an ambulance. The police took the masked men away. Left behind was a question no one could answer. Why? There were no signs of a robbery. No valuables obviously missing. No ransom notes. The attackers refused to speak even after they were booked. It was like they had broken into his lonely house just to hurt him. No reason, no explanation, just violence. Later that night, I went to the hospital to see him. He lay small and bandaged in the bed, machines humming softly around him. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there. He gave me a faint, crooked smile. "If you hadn't called," he whispered, "I don't know what would have happened." A chill went through me as I remembered those masked figures dragging him, the dull thuds of fists hitting flesh. Why him? Why like that? I still don't know, and neither does anyone else. Every Thursday I still drive past his house on my route. The porch light, the trees, that basement window, it all comes rushing back. The masks, the helplessness, the feeling that some people hurt others for no reason at all. And somewhere out there, people like them are still watching, waiting for their next victim. Before the next story starts, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming scary stories. We really depend on your support, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. It was a cold evening a few days before Christmas. I had just finished my last lecture of the semester and was finally heading home for the break. My family had gone to Scotland for the weekend, which meant I had the house to myself, a quiet, empty place to relax and decompress after weeks of stress. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked up to the front door. The house sat dark and still, no lights in any windows. There was something a little eerie about knowing I'd be completely alone for the next couple of days, but I was used to it. I actually liked the peace. I stepped inside, turned on the lights and locked the door behind me. Warmth wrapped around me, and my shoulders loosened a bit. I dropped my bag by the entryway and headed upstairs to my room, shrugging off my jacket. All I could think about was a hot shower and not having to think about essays or exams. After my shower, I padded downstairs in socks, the carpet giving way to the cold kitchen tiles. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. I reheated some leftovers, ate at the table, and felt the last bits of tension from the semester finally start to fade. When I finished, I went into the living room where my PlayStation sat waiting. I turned it on, grabbed my controller and headset and sank into the couch. The familiar startup sound filled the room, and I let myself get absorbed in the game. About an hour later, a loud thud came from upstairs. My fingers froze on the controller. I paused the game and listened. My first thought was something ordinary. Maybe a book had fallen off my desk or a stack of papers had slid to the floor. I waited a moment, heard nothing else, and told myself not to be silly. I unpaused the game. Then it happened again. Another thud, heavier this time, directly above me in my bedroom. Everything in me went still. I was the only one home. Nothing should have been moving up there. The silence after the sound felt thick and unnatural. My heart started racing. For a split second, I thought about going upstairs to check. Then a different thought forced its way in. What if someone is in the house? My legs suddenly felt unsteady. I quickly crossed the living room, shut the door and locked it. My hands shook as I turned the key. Every worst-case scenario I'd ever heard of about break-ins and home invasions flashed through my head all at once. I rushed to the window and peered outside. Snow was drifting down, the street empty and hushed. No people, no cars, nothing at all moving out there. It was like the world had paused, but something had moved upstairs. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed the police. My voice shook as I explained I was alone, that I'd heard heavy noises from my room. They told me officers were on their way. Waiting for them felt endless. The ticking of the clock, the small creaks of the house settling, even my own breathing were suddenly too loud. My eyes stayed locked on the living room door, half expecting the handle to turn at any moment. Finally, I saw flashing blue lights outside. Relief washed over me so hard I almost cried. I let two officers in, still shaking. One went upstairs to check the house while the other stayed with me, asking what I'd heard, where I was, if I'd seen anyone. I could barely get my thoughts straight enough to answer. Around 20 minutes later, the officer who'd gone upstairs came back down. His face was controlled, but his words hit like a punch. "There's been a break-in," he said. "Your bedroom window is open. It looks like someone forced it from the outside and came in that way." My stomach dropped. I knew I'd locked every door and window before leaving for classes that morning. Whoever it was had broken in, gone into my room, and then, hid. Left when they heard me come home. Watched me from above while I played games downstairs. "It doesn't look like anything's been taken," the officer added. "Whoever it was probably left in a hurry when they realized you were here." The word "whoever" made my skin crawl. They searched the rest of the house, but didn't find anyone. They suggested I stay somewhere else that night just in case, but I refused. It was my home. I didn't want to abandon it. Still, as I locked the door behind them after they left, that sense of comfort I'd always had in that house was gone. The idea that a stranger had climbed into my room and moved around above me while I sat unaware downstairs will never stop bothering me. From that night on, the house didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a place that had already been breached. Back in college, I rented a small, beat-up 2-story house just off campus. It wasn't much, but it was cheap, and I shared it with my roommate, Jason. We were both broke, juggling part-time jobs and student loans, just trying to get by. Jason was quiet and mostly kept to himself. He wasn't a bad guy, but some of his friends set off alarms in my head. One in particular made me uneasy: Kyle. I'd met Kyle a couple of times. He was the kind of person you instinctively kept a few feet away from, twitchy, always glancing over his shoulder, carrying this tense, explosive energy like he could snap without warning. Jason trusted him for some reason, so I didn't say anything. Looking back, maybe I should have. One night around midnight, I was in my room trying to study when I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Jason's voice drifted through the ceiling, low and fast. It wasn't unusual for him to have someone over, but something in his tone sounded off. Urgent. Shaken. Then I heard another voice. Kyle. I hadn't seen him around for a while, but the moment I recognized his voice, a rushed, desperate edge to it, my stomach tightened. Floorboards creaked above me as they paced back and forth. Suddenly, the basement door slammed open. Our basement wasn't really a usable space. It was a damp, cracked concrete hole that smelled like mold and rot, with old wooden beams that groaned if you put weight on them. We only went down there when we absolutely had to, and even then, it felt like stepping into a place that didn't want you. The idea of anyone choosing to be down there unsettled me. I slipped out of my room and crept toward the stairs, careful not to make noise. From the landing, I could hear Jason and Kyle more clearly now. Just for a few days, Jason was saying, his voice shaky. That's all I can do. I can't stay out there, man, Kyle snapped back. They're everywhere. The cops are looking for me. I just need somewhere to lay low. My breath caught. The cops? My mind started racing even before I heard the next part. I didn't mean to shoot them, all right, Kyle hissed, anger and panic tangled together. It was supposed to be quick, grab the money and get out. But they fought back and I panicked. I didn't mean to kill them. The words slammed into me. He'd robbed someone. He'd killed people more than one. And now he was hiding in my house. My hands clenched around the banister. I knew I needed to call the police, but I was frozen. Everything felt unreal, like I'd slipped into someone else's nightmare. The basement door creaked again. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Kyle was going down into that dark, damp space to disappear from the world for a while, right under my feet. I backed away and hurried to my room, closing the door as quietly as I could. My heart hammered so hard it made my vision blur. A murderer was in our basement, and my roommate had just agreed to hide him. After that, the whole house felt wrong. Jason kept his head down and avoided looking at me. Every little noise made me jump. I lay awake at night imagining Kyle creeping up the basement stairs, slipping through the hallway, pushing my door open while I slept. The air in the house felt thick, like it was filled with something sour and dangerous. Then one night I heard it for real, footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate. I lay completely still, eyes wide open in the dark, listening as the steps came closer, each one heavier than the last. They reached the top of the stairs. I braced myself for the doorknob to turn, for the door to creak open. It never did. After a pause, the footsteps retreated, descending back into the basement. The door stayed shut. That was the breaking point. The constant fear, the waiting, the knowledge of what was beneath us. I couldn't take it. Early the next morning, while Jason was still asleep, I slipped outside with my phone and called the police. I spoke in a low voice, telling them everything. What I'd heard, who was downstairs, what Kyle had said he'd done. They arrived fast. Squad cars surrounded the house. Officers moved in with weapons drawn. Jason stood there in shock as they swept through, clearing each room before heading for the basement. From the sidewalk, I heard shouting, a struggle, then the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Moments later, they dragged Kyle out in handcuffs. His face was pale, his eyes wild with anger and fear. He saw me. The look he gave me as they pushed him into the back of the car still sends a chill through me. It was a promise that if he ever got the chance, he'd remember. Jason moved out a week later. We barely spoke before he left. After that, the house felt strangely hollow, but it never felt clean. Even with Kyle gone, it was like he'd left something behind in that basement, something dark and heavy that lived in the cracks and shadows. To this day, I sometimes wake up at night and swear I can hear footsteps on basement stairs that aren't there. It was late when I left my friend's house. The sky was pitch black, no stars visible, and the highway ahead stretched out like an empty ribbon through the dark. I'd been driving for a while, the steady hum of the engine and the quiet of the night settling me into a calm, almost hypnotic state. Tall trees lined both sides of the road, forming dense walls of forest that swallowed the light. My headlights carved a narrow path ahead of me, but beyond that beam was just darkness. I didn't mind the isolation. There's a certain peace to being the only car on a long, empty highway at night. Then I glanced down at my dashboard and felt my heart jolt. The fuel gauge was almost on empty, lower than I'd realized. I tried to remember the last gas station I'd passed, but it had been miles back, too far to turn around now and expect to make it. The car started to sputter. The engine coughed, struggled, and finally died. I coasted to the shoulder and came to a stop on the side of the road, surrounded by nothing but forest and darkness. The silence pressed in. What had been peaceful a few minutes before now felt suffocating. I locked the doors out of habit and pulled out my phone, praying for a signal. I had just enough service to call for a tow truck, though the connection cut in and out. I gave them my location as best I could, then hung up and stared out into the night. Time crawled. The wind whispered through the trees, and every rustle sounded like footsteps. I kept checking my mirrors for headlights, but the road stayed empty. Then I saw movement. Two shapes emerged from the tree line on the passenger side, stepping out of the forest and onto the shoulder of the highway. They started walking toward my car. My heartbeat tripled. As they came closer, the faint moonlight revealed their faces. They looked rough, clothes dirty, hair unkempt, faces drawn like they hadn't slept in days. They stopped just outside my window and stared in at me. One of them raised his hand and knocked on the glass. "Help us," he said. His voice came muffled through the window. I froze, my hand still resting on the phone. Instinct screamed at me not to unlock the doors. Something about the way they watched me, the intensity in their eyes, made my skin prickle. The second man tugged on the door handle, testing it repeatedly. That snapped me out of my daze. I clutched my phone again and with shaking fingers dialed the police. In a low voice I explained where I was, that my car had died, and that two men had just come out of the woods and were trying to get in. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way. Outside, the men kept knocking, their palms smearing prints across the cold glass. I stared straight ahead, refusing to meet their eyes, afraid of what I might see there. Anger, desperation, something worse. The wait felt like an eternity. At last, flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rearview mirror. The two men backed away from the car, retreating toward the shadows of the trees as a patrol car pulled up behind me. Two officers stepped out. One came to my window to check on me, while the other turned his flashlight on the tree line. "We'll check it out," he said after I told him what had happened. I stayed in the car, doors still locked. The officers called for the men to come out. After a moment they did, stepping hesitantly from the trees with their hands up. This time they looked less threatening and more broken, exhausted, beaten down. They started talking to the officers. I couldn't hear much, just fragments and tone, but the whole mood shifted. The tension seemed to drain from the air. Curiosity got to me. I rolled my window down a crack, just enough to catch what was being said. The officer nearest my car turned and spoke quietly. "These men say their families were attacked by a group of robbers," he explained. "They've been hiding in the woods trying to get away. The robbers are still out there somewhere." A different kind of fear settled over me. The danger hadn't been the two men knocking on my window. It was whatever or whoever they were running from. The officers immediately called for backup. Soon more patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the trees in red and blue. They led the two men to safety while several officers, flashlights in hand, fanned out into the forest to search for the robbers. I waited in my car, a cold sweat on my skin, watching the beams of light move between the trees and listening for any sound from the woods. Just knowing there were violent men out there, hidden in the dark so close to where I sat trapped, kept my heart racing. It wasn't long before officers emerged with three men in handcuffs, hard faces, cold eyes. The kind of people you instinctively recoil from. They'd been hiding deeper in the forest, probably expecting their victims to keep running, not bring the police down on them. An officer later, helped me sort out the fuel problem so I could get moving again. They assured me the road was safe now. As I pulled back onto the highway, I took one last look at the dark tree line. That long, quiet stretch of road I'd once found peaceful now felt sinister, like anything could step out of that darkness at any time. I drove away hoping I'd never again find myself stranded in a place like that. The night was cold and still, the only sounds the soft rustle of trees and the far-off cry of the wind. I was camping with my friend Mike in a remote part of Alaska, deep in the forest and far from any town. We'd set up our tents beside an old, unpaved road, the kind that barely qualifies as a road at all. It was rough and gravelly, stretching out into wilderness for miles. We hadn't seen another person in hours. That was sort of the point. If you came out here, it was because you wanted to be alone. No one was supposed to be driving that road in the middle of the night. After a long day of hiking, we'd gone to bed early. The air was chilly, but inside my sleeping bag I was warm and comfortable. The stillness of the forest, combined with my exhaustion, pulled me into sleep quickly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the first thing I noticed was a sound that didn't belong, tires rolling over gravel. At first it was distant, just a faint crunching noise. Then it grew louder. I opened my eyes and stared at the dim fabric of the tent above me, trying to process what I was hearing. A car, out here, at this hour. I sat up slowly. Headlights washed across the thin tent walls, bright beams sweeping over us as a vehicle drove past. For a moment, everything inside the tent glowed. Then the light faded as the car continued down the road. I lay back and tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a random car passing through, maybe someone who worked nearby or had taken a wrong turn. Still, it nagged at me. People didn't come out this way, not at night. The sound of the engine faded. Then, a few minutes later, it came back. The tires crunched on gravel again, closer this time. The headlights cut across the tent walls, but instead of passing, they grew brighter and stayed. The vehicle had turned around. I watched the blurred glow through the fabric as the car rolled to a stop about 40 feet away from our tents. The headlights aimed directly at us, flooding the campsite in harsh white light. The engine idled. The car didn't move. I froze. Mike was still asleep, breathing steadily beside me, oblivious. I wanted to wake him, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The whole forest suddenly felt too quiet, like it was listening. For long, stretched-out minutes, nothing happened. The car just sat there with its engine humming and headlights glaring, turning our little campsite into a stage. Then the driver's door creaked open. A silhouette stepped out, framed by the lights, just a dark shape against a wall of white. He stood there for a moment, watching, then started walking toward our tents. His footsteps crunched on the gravel road, slow and unhurried, purposeful. Every muscle in my body tightened. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, closer, moving around our tents. He didn't say a word. The only sounds were his steps and the low rumble of the idling engine. He wasn't calling out to see if we were okay. He wasn't asking for directions. He was just circling us. His shadow slid along the tent walls. Through the small gap at the bottom of the fabric, I could see his boots passing inches from where I lay. He made a slow, deliberate loop around our campsite, like a predator examining potential prey. My mouth went dry. I wanted to shout, to tell him to leave, but my voice wouldn't come. We were in the middle of nowhere. If something went wrong, there was no one to hear us, no one to help. He kept walking, tracing that same dreadful circle. Then he stopped right outside my tent. I could hear him breathing, slow, measured, uncomfortably close. A cold sweat spread across my back. I held my breath, afraid that even the smallest sound would give me away, as if he somehow didn't already know we were there. After what felt like forever, his footsteps started again. They moved away this time, back toward the car. I heard the door open and close, then the engine revved. The headlights swung across the trees as the car turned around and slowly drove off into the night. I didn't move for a long time after that. I lay there, muscles locked, listening for any sign that he might have come back without the lights, that he was still out there in the dark between the trees. Nothing. Just the wind and the forest and my own pounding heart. Mike stirred at one point, mumbling in his sleep, but never fully woke. I never fell back asleep. Every stick snapping in the distance, every rustle of branches made my pulse spike all over again. When the sun finally rose, the relief was almost physical. We packed camp quickly, neither of us saying much. The forest didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a place someone had quietly stepped into in the night, looked us over, and then just left. I still don't know what that man wanted. I only know how it felt lying there in darkness, listening to him circle us and say nothing at all. My name is Linda, and I've been living alone for over 2 years. My husband is in the U.S. Army, stationed overseas. The distance is hard, but over time I've adjusted to the quiet routines of life without him. My dog, Max, helps. He's a large German shepherd, protective, loyal, always by my side. With him in the house, I've always felt safer. Until one night when that sense of security shattered. It was a Friday evening. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner. The house was still and ordinary, the soft buzz of the refrigerator, the occasional creak from the old floorboards. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making the branches tap lightly against the windows. Living alone, you get used to those little sounds. They become background noise. Max was lying at my feet in the kitchen as I wiped down the counters. Suddenly, he lifted his head. His ears pricked forward and a low growl rumbled from his chest. I froze mid-wipe. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, knowing he couldn't answer but needing to say something. Then I heard it too, faint footsteps on the gravel driveway. Not the wind, not a branch. Footsteps. Max jumped up, barking sharply, his entire body tense as he stared at the front door. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The porch light cast a weak glow, but I didn't see anyone out there. Still, Max wouldn't calm down. He paced and barked, eyes fixed on the door like he could see something I couldn't. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe an animal. Maybe the wind kicking something loose. "Come on, Max," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's bedtime." I turned off the lights downstairs and went up to my bedroom. Somehow, being upstairs always felt safer, further from the doors and windows, away from whatever might be outside. I made sure everything was locked, then got into bed. Max settled beside me, but his breathing stayed just a bit too alert. Eventually, I drifted off. I don't know how long I slept before the crash woke me. I bolted upright, heart slamming. Max was on his feet, growling deep and vicious now. It sounded like the front door had exploded inward. I could hear the wind rushing through an open space that hadn't been opened before, and beneath it, slow, deliberate footsteps moving inside my house. Someone was in my living room. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone as I grabbed it from the nightstand and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator that someone had broken in, that I was upstairs with my dog, that I was terrified. I locked the bedroom door and pressed my back against it as though that would help. Max stood beside me, muscles taut, teeth bared, ready to attack if anyone came through. The footsteps downstairs moved from room to room, unhurried, as if whoever it was felt completely in control. Then they stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Far off, faint at first, I heard sirens. They grew louder, closer. Relief and fear crashed over me together. What if the intruder panicked before the police got there? What if they came upstairs? Outside, the sirens cut off, replaced by shouted commands. I stayed put, barely breathing, listening as the police entered the house and moved through the rooms. Finally, someone knocked on my bedroom door. "Ma'am, it's the police. You're safe now." I opened the door with shaking hands. 2 officers stood there. Max rushed past me, barking at them, confused but still on high alert. They assured me everything was under control and led me downstairs. The front door was shattered, hanging crooked on its hinges. Splintered wood littered the floor. My safe, familiar home suddenly felt like a stranger's house, damaged and invaded. Outside, a man sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car. I'd never seen him before, messy hair, wild eyes, a strange, unsettling smirk on his face, like this was all some twisted joke to him. One of the officers turned to me, his expression grim. "Ma'am, we've been looking for this man for a while," he said. "He's been following you for weeks. He knows your husband is deployed and that you live alone. He was planning to rob you." The words landed like a physical blow. He'd been watching me, tracking my habits, noticing when lights went on and off when I left, when I came home, waiting for the right moment. All that time, I'd gone about my life, walking the dog, going to work, cooking dinner, never realizing someone was lurking in the background, studying me like a target. Standing there in my broken doorway, with police moving in and out of my living room, I realized the house I'd tried so hard to make feel safe and warm had been under someone else's gaze for weeks. And the worst part was knowing I hadn't felt him there at all. I work in a small office downtown. Nothing special, just a handful of desks, some computers, filing cabinets overflowing with paperwork. During the day, it's busy enough, phones ringing and people coming and going. But after hours, the place empties out fast. Sometimes I have to stay late to finish up projects. One night, I was the only one left. Everyone else had gone home hours earlier. The office was quiet except for the soft whir of the air conditioning. It was past 9, and I was hunched over my desk, trying to finish a stack of reports due the next morning. The faint glow from my computer screen was the main light in the room, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls and floor. The rest of the office lay in a kind of dim, muted half-darkness. It wasn't pitch black. The hallway lights outside leaked in just enough to keep the edges of the room from disappearing, but it felt lonely. I'd stayed late plenty of times before, but something about that night felt different, heavier, like the air itself was thicker. After what felt like an hour of staring at spreadsheets, my eyes started to burn. I leaned back in my chair to rest them for a moment. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of my computer screen, something moved behind me. Just a quick blur of darkness sliding across the room. I spun my chair around, heart skipping. The office looked exactly the same, empty chairs, silent phones, the soft glow from the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, my gaze kept drifting to a corner at the far end of the room. The shadows there looked too dark, as if they weren't just the absence of light, but something thicker, pooled in that one spot. I blinked, telling myself it was nothing, that I was just tired and staring at a screen too long. But when I looked again, the darkness was still there. Not just a shadow from a desk or a chair, just a vague shape that didn't seem attached to anything. I tried to ignore it. I turned back to my work, forcing myself to focus. Every few minutes, though, I found myself glancing back at that corner. It seemed to shift, just slightly, like it was moving or breathing. Finally, I decided to get up and walk around. Maybe stretching my legs would clear my head. As I stood, a strange reluctance washed over me, a resistance to walking anywhere near that far corner. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a shadow, just bad lighting. Still, when I headed toward the small kitchen area at the back of the office, I slowed as I neared that side of the room. The pull to look was too strong. I turned my head and froze. The darkness there wasn't just a trick of my eyes. It was real and it was moving. It didn't look like a person. It didn't have a clear shape. It was more like a swirling mass of black, writhing slowly in place like smoke trapped in water. The rest of the room looked unchanged, but that corner seemed wrong, like a hole had opened up in the air itself. My heart slammed against my ribs. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my eyes locked on that shifting patch of shadow. It stretched, thinned, and then extended outward. It looked almost like it was reaching toward me. Suddenly the temperature dropped. The air went so cold I could see my breath, tiny white clouds in front of my face. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The shadow crept closer, still shapeless, still silent. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, a deep, primal fear that told me that whatever that thing was, I should not let it touch me. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, it stopped. The darkness flickered, like a candle flame guttering in a draft, and then snapped out of existence. The corner of the room looked normal again, just faintly lit furniture and plain walls. The air slowly warmed and my breath stopped forming little clouds. I stood there for a second, shaking. I didn't bother trying to go back to my desk. I grabbed my bag, shut down my computer with hands that weren't quite steady, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, I glanced back one last time. The shadow wasn't there, but the feeling was. That sensation of being watched, of not being alone, clung to the room like an invisible stain. I almost ran down the hallway. When I finally stepped outside into the night air, it felt cleaner, even though my chest was still tight and my fingers trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. Driving home, my mind replayed the whole thing over and over, searching for some rational explanation. A glitch in the lights, eye strain, imagination. None of it felt right. All I know is that I haven't stayed late at the office by myself since that night, and I don't plan to anytime soon.